It is great to have Rick Sanchez joining us today, veteran journalist and Emmy Award winner who is the co-founder, CEO, and president of Agua Media. Rick, it's so great to have you on.
Listen, David. I am so proud of you as a fellow Latino. Everything you do, your determination, your ability to always fight for the little guy, your consistency, uh, general fairness, your messaging. You do a great job, David, and you ought to be commended. And I just got to I got to tell you with all transparency, I've been a fan for some time. I've been listening to what you do, and you do a really great job. So there you
Well,
go.
I'm shocked and flattered, but also it provides like a really good segue into when we think about the dynamics of the American Spanish speaking or Latino origin community.
Yeah.
It's such a diverse community. Many people see me, they say, David, you look white. How is it that you're South American? And of course, you and I and many people in our community, we know about the diversity, but
Yeah.
politically, it's also quite a diverse group. And as I want to hear from you, the conventional wisdom is often Cubans and Venezuelans. They often come to the US. They become Republicans because they see that as a way to fight that which they left in their home countries. Those
Mhm.
from many other South American countries and Central American tend to be more democratic leaning. Is that still accurate today?
I think to a certain extent it is. Unfortunately, it's overplayed. So what happens is, like with the election with Trump, for example, Trump did in fact, he gets he gets credit for winning Florida. Unfortunately, he didn't win Nevada. He didn't win Texas. He didn't win anywhere else in the country. 70% of the people in the United States are not Venezuelans or Argentinians or Cubans. They are, for the most part, either Mexican or from other parts of Central America. But that message gets lost, David. So still, uh, the message seems to be that all the Latinos are moving to the Republican camp, and that's not true. Latinos continue to vote basically two-thirds Democrat and one-third Republican, and that's changed a little bit over time. But it seems to me that the message that's coming certainly from the right is spending millions and millions of dollars with Americano and all these other front groups to try
Yep.
and bring in, and Soros, for example, to try and bring in Latinos. Um, they get credit for trying, but considering the amount of money they're putting into it and considering how little competition they're getting from Democrats to try and keep Latinos there, they actually aren't doing that well. I wouldn't score them highly on that,
Yeah, in
considering
terms
those
of,
two
well,
things I just said.
it's interesting because you often touted is, oh, in 2020, Trump increased his share of the Latino vote by 8%. But when you start with a small number, even increasing it is not super impressive. But that being said, if the trend continued, it actually would be hugely significant.
Well, sure. And they even did well in this last election, if you want to go by decimal points.
Yep.
And I think to a certain extent, look, I mean, let's just call this what it is. How much can Latinos be told that they're rapists and criminals by certain segments of the Republican Party, like Cruella DeVille running for governor in Arizona? And, after a while, it's obviously going to create a backlash. The problem, and I wish what I would see is more David Pacmans and more Rick Sanchez's. And I'm not just trying to say that we're the only ones that got this thing figured out, but I'd like to see that on the NBCs and the CBSs and the CNNs and other places where they don't just kowtow to Latinos and tell you about how much they like you, but actually understand that we're the fifth largest GDP in the world if we were a country, that 80% of us are American citizens, that 41% of us under the age of 50 speak English as our language. None of these things are proliferated. So I don't, I think both the Republican Party beating the crap out of the Latinos, and then the Democratic Party, unfortunately, not going far enough to really represent or understand Latinos, almost even taking them for granted to a certain extent, creates this dynamic that we're in right now. And it's got to change on both sides, obviously.
One of the stories that's been told in the political world for at least 10 years, if not even longer, is there's these demographic shifts happening in states like Florida and Texas. And part of it is age related, but a lot of it is the growth of the Hispanic or Latino population. And it's just going to make it difficult and eventually impossible for Republicans to win Florida and Texas. And it hasn't played out. And many people are looking at the numbers and saying, okay, is this happening? What is it going to play out? What is happening with that?
Well, I think you have to take one thing into account, and this is maybe the most important thing. Latinos, the common age of a Latino, David, is 11. Once, 11. That's the node, right? Scientifically speaking, mathematically speaking, the common age of a Latino is 11. Lock that number in, because the common age of a white Anglo-Saxon non-Latino in the United States is 58. So what that tells you is, because Latinos are young, they're going to be voting in the future more in line with what we just saw some young people voting in this last election. So what they're going to care about is not comunista, comunista, like we hear today in parts of South Florida, but they're probably going to be voting more in line with regular, American young people. And that would not bode well for the Republicans. But right now, yeah, Republicans have done a great job in South Florida in particular, bringing in the Venezuelan and the Cuban vote and the others who come from certain parts of Latin America by telling them that if you vote Democrat, you're voting for Chavez, you're voting for Fidel Castro, because all Democrats are communists.
One of the things that applies generally when it comes to targeting young voters is that the right seems much more committed financially to setting up things like Turning Point USA, sending Ben Shapiro to college campuses and paying handsome speaking fees, et cetera. You really don't see it as much on the left. And it seems that the same thing applies specifically to the targeting of Latino voters, where there's lots of right-wing Spanish language political content on the radio in the United States, but really not much alternative to that.
That's kind of one of the reasons I'm doing Agua Media, because it's really a bit of a passion project for myself and for Solomon Trujillo, my partner. Saul and I have realized that if we don't get the story out ourselves, and thank God we have a David Pakman, who's also a Latino, who's also an influential member of the media community, to be able to tell the story that, unfortunately, I wish MSNBC would tell, but they don't. Let's face it, we're 20% of the population in the United States, and we are underrepresented across the board, whether it's Hollywood or whether it's on cable television. Nancy Pelosi said something interesting. God love her. And I know she made a mistake, and she's an older woman and stuff, but she should have known better. Soon after DeSantis did this stunt where he literally hijacked people or kidnapped people and sent them to another state from Texas, her response was, what a shame. Because imagine the farmers in Florida could have used some of those immigrants, for example, to pick their fruit and their vegetables. And I thought to myself, Nancy, God bless you, but that's not what you say. The answer is, right now and in the future, Latinos will be the doctors, the business people. They'll be the people who create this unbelievably enterprising economy of ours. They tend to hire more. They tend to start more small businesses. You need to know that, Nancy, when you talk about Latinos, and that's the problem. And we don't get it at CNN. We don't get it at the MSNBCs. And those are the ones who are supposed to be our stalwarts. And in that example, and it's not to beat up, Nancy Pelosi, but, that's the wrong mess. That's the wrong counter to the other argument. That's important, David. And that's why guys like you and I are out there to share these things.
Well, one thing I want to ask you about, and I have no idea what your position is on this, so I could be stepping into a minefield here, is one of the things that when you talk about the conversation among the left and Latino Americans has to do with the gender neutralizing of the Spanish language. And I'm talking about Latinx. And so that's in English, Latinx. And then there's a movement in Spanish as well, where it would take something like the word amigos or amigas, which are gendered, and create a new one, which is amigues with an E. Now, my view is this is a really bad idea. I don't think this makes any sense. Most people in Central and South America don't use that later example I gave. Latinx is mostly being proposed by white Americans. I think that if this becomes the thing that is the topic in the U.S. among the left with this population, I think it's a disaster. Where are you on that?
We're just throwing the right a bone to be able to use to coalesce Latinos against Democrats. And then they could go with that woke thing that, is so amorphous and opaque. I don't even know what the hell it means. But
Yeah.
don't do that. I'm so proud of my mother for everything she gave to me, as you are of your mother. And your mother is a Latina, and my mother is a Latina, and my father is a Latino. I can't think of describing Paco, my dad, as a Latinx. What does that mean to me? Besides, if you're going to do it with us, Latinos, then you also have to do it with Italians, because they too use a non-gender neutral, language, because
Yeah.
they all come from Romance languages, and Romanians and the French and Portuguese and everything. So leave well enough alone, as our friend Willie Shakespeare said, when it comes to something like this. And let's tackle the really big issues that are affecting Latinos in the United States and not change their nomenclature. It just seems like a bridge too far. It almost seems like almost a little insulting to me. So when it comes to Latinx, in fact, when it comes to all colorations, I don't think we should be brown. I don't think we should be yellow. I don't think we should be black. I think you're an Argentinian American and I am a Cuban American, and my friend Jerry over here, who I'm looking at, is a Mexican American, and somebody can be a Jamaican American or an Irish American. It's a better description. In the old days, when you called someone a colored person, it was insulting. And it seems like today we want to bring that back and somehow celebrate it. I'm against colors. Let's call each other as descriptively as we can, as we learned in journalism school, so that we understand how people are described.
Let's talk a little bit about immigration and specifically DACA. DACA to me seems like it would be the lowest hanging fruit that both Democrats and Republicans would be incentivized to figure out and deal with and say, okay, here's something we've fixed, so it's not just endlessly a, quote, crisis. Now, of course, the term crisis is exaggerated and it's used right leading up to an election, and then suddenly you don't hear about it for a year. We know all of that stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
But on the DACA issue, it seems overwhelmingly popular to say we're not going to send people back to other countries who came here through no fault of their own as minors with parents. Why hasn't it happened? Is part of it that neither side wants to allow the other side to be able to take credit for that?
I think, to be honest with you, obviously Republicans have had an odd and almost cruel view of that, and have for many, many years, with some exceptions. We can give some credit to George Bush, and we can give some credit, hell, even to Lindsey Graham at some point. I don't know what the heck happened to that guy. There was a time when he had a different way of thinking about things like this.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Democrats have never really made this, including, President Obama, have never really made this the priority that they needed to make it, to really make sure that they were making strides with the Latino community where it matters, right here in el corazón, as we like to say, and that's, I think, to a fault, and I think oftentimes Democrats, as I said in that famous documentary that Billy did, the thing about Democrats is they're always trying to do the right thing and please everybody. And Republicans could give a crap. They just want to win. So Republicans don't care who they insult and what they do, as long as in the end they can win. That's kind of the McConnell message, right? In many ways, which it's interesting now that they're trying to kick him out. And Democrats instead have always kind of overplayed things and be concerned about how it's going to be seen. And, well, if we come out too heavy on this, then we could lose middle America because we might lose votes in the Midwest. And they overthink things so much, and in the end, they don't do enough. And I think if Democrats had gotten on board DACA, for example, really gotten on board, I think they would be faring better now and not fighting, between 60, 65, and 70% of the vote. And really, they would probably be topping out around 80%. Because remember, the people that are affected by this especially are the people who are the larger part of the Latino community, right? The Mexican American and the Central American part of those Latino communities. So it would make a huge difference, I think.
Well, hopefully we will at least see some progress on that at some point. It may take Democrats allowing Republicans to do it under their watch to get that win. And the question is whether Democrats would go for it because it's the right thing to do, even if they don't get all of the political benefit.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, in this last election, I watched something happen. There was this guy who turned out to be a pretty awful human being, but for some reason, he and I used to talk a lot. He would call me at least once a week when he was running Fox News, and that's Roger Ailes. And he used to say to me, and said publicly, in fact, that the funny thing about Republicans is they don't tell you what they think. They just show up to the polling place and show their actions with their vote. And they don't go around giving their opinions. Wow, what a difference between what just happened in this election, not just with Latinos, but with others. Republicans are now the hippies of the 1970s. They're the ones having parades. They're the ones putting it out there. I would never go screaming down the middle of the street holding a banner of any candidate,
No.
or putting bumper stickers all over my house and doing all of those things. And that's what you see now with Republicans. And you invite him over to your backyard barbecue, and he happens to be your neighbor, and he's Republican, and he immediately starts telling you who's going to vote for, who he hates, and you're like, okay, here, you want a beer? And it's the weirdest. It's the weirdest thing.
It's just strange.
Like, why are you telling me this? And that used to be what Democrats were kind of like in the 60s and 70s. Now Democrats just keep their mouths shut. They wait, and when it comes to vote, they voted against it. And that's kind of what we saw in this last midterm. And it made me think of the flip that maybe happened in our society.
Yeah.
And Roger Ailes captured the quiet Republican and created a television network for them, right? And brought them out to the point now where they're loud and proud, but not effective.
Right. They're not quiet anymore. That's for sure.
No. That's the point. It's almost like it's counterintuitive or ironically different.
We've been speaking with Rick Sanchez, who's the co-founder, CEO, and president of Agua Media. Rick, really a pleasure having you on.
It's a pleasure to be with you as well, David. Thanks so much. And, vamos, dale.